With the pre-mark down, it's time to lay some tape. This is where our tape cart comes in. This particular tape cart, as mentioned before, is pretty old, still works. There are a few quirks to it, but the general idea is you use that rolling pin looking thing there in the middle. That slides right through the center core of the tape, and there are several divider bars in the middle that you can use to align the tape left to right. For a single roll of tape, you'll typically put that right in the middle. You'll line the tape up with the sticky side up as it comes out the front. It goes over the roller and it goes down the front. There are these claws there that are used to apply the tape. We haven't really had much luck with those. And as you saw that note, we've actually removed that blade down there, which is intended to cut the tape when you're done. It's never worked well on this machine, and it gets to be a safety hazard with your hands down there, so we chose to take that out. Once the tape's lined up, you adjust the bars to either side to keep it centered, tighten down the thumb screws, and the tape is loaded, ready to move the machine into position and start your lines. Typically, you're going to want to load the tape somewhere it's safe off the roadway so you're not out near the cars. But once the tape's in, you move the cart into position. These are relatively heavy. Sometimes it can be easier to turn by tilting it up. The front roller doesn't rotate other than front to back, so turning a sharper corner can be difficult if the cart's fully on the ground. And it's very important to make sure that that front caster wheel is straight ahead. The trickiest part of any tape line is when you start, making sure that tape is straight. If you back into position and that caster wheel spins right as you start, it can really wiggle the tape. So as you saw there, he moved forward, got that caster wheel aligned. Once you're in position, you use an ungloved hand, sort of stick your hand on that tape, push it down in there, and just inch it forward to get it started. With the tape started, now it's simply a matter of rolling it out. In this example, we're doing blackout. We're using a 6-inch tape on a 4-inch painted line. So it's important to keep that perfectly centered so you have a little overlap on both sides. That's why we talked about making sure that that single roll of tape was lined in the middle of the tape cart so that you can put that caster wheel right down on the center of that line and keep things nice and straight. You can see the tape rolling out, and in this case we're just going to run it till it's empty. With the blade removed, we use a box knife or a hand knife. Typically it's easier to cut it up higher, so you can leave a little bit of extra slack, and then once it's cut, you roll out the last of it to get a nice good finish. When covering broken lines, either cat track or something such as the skip line here, there are two ways to do it. In this example, we're going to do a solid continuous covering using the tape cart. This is sometimes the easiest way to do it. It's also the fastest. However, it takes more material. So if we're going to be doing solid continuous coverings of broken lines, we need to make sure that we are factoring that into the amount of tape that we are purchasing and estimating. But if you're going to run through an intersection, it can sometimes be faster to run the cart through in a continuous motion than it is to do the individual covering, which we'll discuss in a later section. With the tape down, we need to make sure it's well stuck to the ground. So there's a couple ways to do that. The easiest is to use the tape cart that you just used to put the tape down and roll back over it, using one of the rear wheels to run right over the tape. This isn't perfect, but it can get some of the job done. If the tape is going down in a section where traffic is driving on it in line, it's probably not a huge issue. If cars are going to be turning on that tape, you want to make sure it's really well stuck down. Another way to do it is to use a tamp cart. Here's an example of a smaller, lighter weight one. It's just a weighted wheel system that you then use to run along the tape you put down, and that just puts a little more pressure on it. Some of the ones that are a little better are a little bit larger, a little bit heavier, and just help to apply extra weight on that tape. And for really old school, just get out your truck. You're on a job, you probably have one of these with you. Nothing's going to do a better job of applying pressure to that tape onto the ground than using the very heavy wheels and tires of a truck. Again, it's very important not to turn your tires when you're on that. It'll rip that tape right up. But just driving in a nice, smooth, straight line is the best. However, this can be difficult in tighter situations where passing traffic may not allow the truck to fit in the work zone. Applying color tape is the same as applying blackout. The only real difference being now we're going to be following our cat track pre-mark instead of making sure that we're covering the existing line. Typically, we're using the 4" by 360-foot rolls. These can be pretty heavy. If it's a single roll, it's not that big of a deal typically to handle it on your own. Using that rolling pin style system, drop it in there, get it aligned with the center of the cart, sticky side up, feed it over the front. I've actually got it fed slightly wrong here. It's theoretically supposed to go under that top bar and over the roller, but it doesn't really matter. It works the same. Using a free hand, get it down in there just a little bit, and just tip that cart forward a little to get it to out here, and start your rolling. Again, with the tape loaded in the center of the cart, using that front wheel out there as your reference point, you want to track that down your pre-mark as closely as you can to the center. You want to be nice and smooth in your motions, especially if you have any sort of turns or angles. Make a nice arc with that, and just do a constant smooth pressure. Every time you stop, it can be a little bit hard to get that tape moving again, and you might get a little bit of a kink, but if you just keep moving, it works pretty good. When you get to the end, again, using a knife, you can just cut that tape. The sharper the knife, the better. The tape will dull that knife pretty quickly, so having extra blades is pretty important. Rolling it out, and there is your nice, smooth, straight, white edge line. When applying a double yellow center line, all the same principles are going to apply, but now we have the added difficulty of 2 rolls of tape. So twice as much weight is going to be your first issue. You want to make sure, obviously, that they're both lined the same way. They're both going to have the sticky side up when you load them. And when you're using that rolling pin and you're getting them set up, make sure that those 2 rolls of tape don't touch, because they'll stick together. And as you can see here, you're going to need some help to get them back apart. Once the rolls are both on the pin, typically speaking, you're going to want to have 2 people do this. These 2 rolls together are quite heavy. And you're going to want to make sure that the divider bars in the machine have been somewhat pre-set up. 1 roll is going to need to be on the far edge, because we only have 3 divider bars, not 4. So you're going to use that outside edge as a divider. When you're fastening those divider bars, you want to make sure they're close to the tape, but not completely touching. There is adhesive on the sides, so you want to have a little bit of a gap so you're not pinching that roll, but it's also not going to have room to wiggle and walk too much, so it keeps it roughly right where it needs to be. You're then going to use those other 2 divider bars to set the proper distance. In this case, we have 4" lines. We're going to have a 4" gap, using my tape to make sure they're set properly, and then using those other 2 divider bars to lock that roll into position. Once the tape is set, we now have the extra challenge of getting 2 different rolls of tape started simultaneously. This can sometimes be a little tricky even with 1 roll, so now of course with 2 we have to do a little more. But the principle is the same. You need to get that tape down just to where it's barely touching the ground and have that cart inched forward. Having a second person to help sort of nudge it forward just enough to get a grip is helpful. With that blade removed, this should be a lot easier than you're watching here in this video. Once the tape is fully loaded, we're going to be doing the same thing we did both with the black and the white. Simply put some pressure on the cart, smooth and steady, and start rolling out those lines. A couple things with the double yellow. First, you've got 2 rolls. You've got twice as much resistance on the tape breaking loose. Sometimes it can take quite a bit of effort to really get this cart moving. Depends on how much adhesive is on the tape. Certain brands use a little bit more adhesive than the others. The other issue is that with the white and the black, since we were doing a single roll, we had those loaded in the center of the cart, and we were able to use that caster wheel up front as our reference point and track right down the middle of the line that we were trying to do. In this case, that tape is off-centered a little bit. We have 1 roll against the far left, the other roll is 4" away, so they're not perfectly centered, and you're going to have to use a slightly different reference point on that caster wheel to judge where exactly that tape should be laid down. Once you get the hang of this isn't a difficult situation, but it is important to remember that the center of the double yellow tape in this case is not the center of the tape cart. Once you reach the end of the run, you're going to cut the tape just as we've done before, both rolls in this case. Once both of those are cut, you're going to move the cart forward to finish out the last of that run, And typically the best thing to do is to use your feet, a little bit of a stomping motion, just to make sure the ends of those things are nice and adhered to the street before you come through with the tamp cart or the truck, just to make sure those ends aren't hanging loose. And there you go. You got a nice double yellow line running right down the road. You can see here, however, at the beginning we had some issues. When we set those two pieces of tape, the one on the right side of this image, or the left lane if you're looking forward, was a little bit of an angle. And so when we started that run, it kind of curved a little bit. This is a problem that is not uncommon with tape, that first few feet may come out a little less than perfect. But that's something you get done with practice. You really want to, you can pull it up, reapply it, or another method would be to start a few feet in advance of where you really want to be. You could then cut off that messed up section and remove it. But not usually something that's going to be that big of a deal.